Last week, we were able to kind of touch upon IT risk response and mitigation, where I was talking about I'm not a big fan of the word mitigation in that part, but ISACA like to include it, but I just tend to see it as IT risk response, right? We touch upon how, if we go back all the way from the beginning of the class, we touch upon identifying risk. We also touch upon that IT risk assessment, including how after all of those are in place, we kind of have now identified the risk. We also did an assessment to understand if the risk severity, whether if it's high, low, moderate, or whatsoever, and how it's going to really affect us from a business perspective. Then we kind of choose a response. We can either respond to it by accepting the risk, mitigating the risk, transferring the risk, just that part of risk response, right? Our response to whatever it is we identified, so we get to that comfort zone from a business perspective where, okay, we are willing to take this risk. That is the remaining risk, right? Now, does the job end there? Absolutely not. It is a process, it is a life cycle. Just because we have responded to the risk doesn't mean that the job is done. No, we now constantly monitor it, right? We constantly report on it. We constantly begin identifying where are the places where it's becoming ineffective. Then we optimize it, or we continuously respond to it. But as part of that monitoring our reporting, we are then identifying future risk again. So we basically get stuck in this loop, right? Start, finish. We keep going back and forth, and that's basically it. And when you think of this, let's use hurricanes for example, right? We way ahead of time, we can identify it and we begin to quantify, okay, if this type of hurricane comes up, how is it going to affect us? It's going to wipe all these places. It's going to impact us from these places. The lights will be out, whatsoever. All of those assessments, right? Then we begin to plan. Most times when we think of hurricanes, we often kind of do that risk, I wouldn't say transfer, but basically we transfer ourselves elsewhere. That's our response to it. If it's not as big as uh, something that will really impact us from life wise, loss of life and whatsoever, we basically identify, okay, how are we going to do it? Is it because it's super windy? Do we just need to put some shield in like our glass pane windows and whatsoever, and then we'll be okay if we just stay inside? Do we need to go into a bunker? All of those are part of that risk response. But just because the hurricane has passed does not mean that we are no longer going to be looking at future hurricanes that might be coming up, right? So that part of monitoring and reporting. Same thing with controls. You deploy a firewall to kind of filter out certain traffic because you identify traffic coming from those places have some risk associated with it that could severely impact your business. But just because you deploy the firewall doesn't mean you're not going to constantly monitor it to see how it's changing, how whether if the control is still effective or not. Because guess what? If you're not monitoring, a single update could now basically disable a lot of things, right? We all know how updates can impact our existing controls. Okay. Any question on that before we kind of dive into what does reporting or what do we do during monitoring and reporting? Okay, I will take that as we are good and move forward. Oh, look at that! I have this. So the objective of this, obviously, as I mentioned, is to really kind of monitor the controls and ensure like the continued efficiency of the controls, that the controls are still effective, and the reporting part has to do with constantly reporting to either stakeholders to make sure they are aware of where we are and our continuous strategy. Additionally, the reporting could be part of a compliance requirement, like when you take, for example, the financial sector, where there is a need for all executive, I believe, to be reporting is it their financial standings. I'm not very conversant on that part, but if there's anyone, I'm looking for a volunteer who speaks a lot on that financial sector, that there is a reporting requirement, I believe, for all stakeholders at a certain level. Anyone who is who has a background in the financial sector want to volunteer? Just a minute to kind of cover what the reporting is. I think is it the SOC or what? No, I think it's this Sarbanes-Oxley. That's the control. Anybody knows it? No? Still looking for a volunteer. Someone who
Yeah,
knows.
I've never worked in the financial sector for cybersecurity before. I've worked in insurance for it, but not financial.
Okay. Any reporting requirements or like the insurance side where maybe there is a compliance requirement for the insurance provider to continuously report something?
Yes, actually, I can speak on that. So in automobile insurance, which is where I primarily work and own my own business, we have to do and comply with certain government regulations mandated by an entity called the Insurance Commissioner of California. It's a federally appointed state commissioner that oversees all insurance companies operating in that state. And there are a couple of laws that are basically guaranteed in the insurance repair procedure, first of which that the vehicle has to be put back in the condition it was before the loss. So that means that the insurance companies have to continually report their compliance of satisfaction of their insureds and claimants to the Department of Insurance. So you have to do like Department of Insurance reinspection forms and make sure that you're complying with all the rules and regulations outlined by the Department of Insurance to make sure that you maintain that satisfactory rating if you're operating in California specifically.
See, no, that is really good. Thanks so much for sharing. That is that maintaining effectiveness, if you see from the compliance side, right? And for them to making sure they are in satisfactory state, it's basically the same thing, making sure that the control that was put in place is still effective. That is, the insurance providers are continuously being transparent and all of those things. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Kind of similar thing. But
Professor, I have another. It just occurred to me. I should have thought of it before, but publicly traded companies have and have had for a couple of decades now the requirement to operate under a law called Sarbanes-Oxley,
yep.
which requires them to attest that their financial statements are true and correct. And I can't remember which case this came out of, whether it was Enron or what, but that in turn then forces IT organizations to be part of the compliance process, because of course you can't have financial records that you can trust if you don't have IT that you can trust. And so for publicly traded companies, it really flows into the whole IT operation, and then from there, of course, into cybersecurity.
Yep, that is the actually one. Thank you. So by the way, thank you so much for sharing, John, because that's the same one I was talking about, the Sarbanes-Oxley. Thank you again for saying the publicly traded companies. That's the
another thing that a lot of people don't realize that I've run into is how long you have to keep records for, like 7 years, like tax records and stuff. And a lot of companies want to destroy that the second they're done with their taxes. Nope, you have to keep that for a long time.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I would touch a little bit about record retention, by the way. So this is something that happened recently with for one of my 401k accounts. I do not like the idea of seeing multiple accounts in place, even though I'm not using it. Like a previous employer that the account is basically zero, but it keeps showing. And I was like, hey, can you cancel this account? And they were like, nope, they have a retention requirement apparently for any investment account that anybody has opened for them to retain it for. Is it a minimum of 10 years or so? I can't remember exactly what they said, but they do have their own internal kind of, the company I am with, they have their own internal retention period. As such, they might say that they have closed an account, but it's not necessarily closed. Maybe it's just not visible to the consumer. Banks also have the same kind of thing. So yeah, thank you both for sharing. And as we were talking about this, I'm also thinking of the reporting side from the government perspective, where all of the civilian side must report their not just the budgeting, but the spending as well. That's all part of reporting, right? There are certain organizations that do not need to provide that. That's why they don't get audited. But we do know like most of the civilian side needs to provide some transparency around budgets and whatsoever. Same thing. One could say the need for providing that transparency is to get rid of corruptions and things like that, which then the corruption is considered the risk, right? And that reporting mechanism that was put in place is now the control. And the constantly doing the reporting is ensuring that the control is still effective, right? So those are all kind of examples of how it is. So thank you both to all of you that kind of shared your own perspective. But also for those of you that are kind of learning this, just keep thinking about it. What are things that you report, you are constantly having to report, or you know that needs to be reported, and then you are kind of you can then put together to see if it's a compliance requirement or if it's because you need to show a certain control is still effective, right? And then this is more from our external viewpoint that we are talking about, but as we if we want to look at it from the organization from internal perspective, like in as much as monitoring is very essential, it the effectiveness of monitoring heavily relies on reporting, right? Because think of it, the system administrators, security engineers, people that work in that security operations center can sit down all day sitting behind the computer and monitoring things. But unless there is a mechanism that allows them, once they see something, they either escalate it by reporting to the appropriate channel or they take an action and still, after taking the action, report what was done, it starts becoming ineffective, right? Because sitting down to identify and monitor is not necessarily the actionable task, but the reporting ignites the action that needs to be taken, right? So that's another way of saying it. It could also be a mechanism for senior management to have insight into things. So I am a big fan of documentation, and I will be, I will keep saying this. The field really heavily relies on documentation. Might not necessarily have to be the old way of things of pen and a paper, but from GRC tools, leveraging existing uh, tools as well as new methods of way, the entire risk management framework as well as compliance and whatsoever is heavily data reliant. So we have to find a way to kind of store it to make sense of it, right? Okay, so how do we achieve all of those things? KRIs, we kind of all know that, right? But as we are talking about monitoring, we also are talking about reporting, but we are doing that to identify the effectiveness. Is it safe to say that we must have a defined threshold of what is it that as we are monitoring things, if it goes beyond a certain threshold, then we are now getting to a state where we are considering like, okay, this is unacceptable, or this is a step where the control is no longer effective. Some sort of a tracking mechanism. Does everybody follow me on what that threshold I'm talking about? Is there anybody who does not understand what I'm talking about? Great. So KRIs, they are used to basically measure risk levels. I would say in comparison to defined thresholds, right? So you have a threshold of what is considered acceptable to you and what is unacceptable to you. Let me give a very, very dumbed down example of we kind of all know how we track our oil consumptions, right? Gas consumptions in vehicles. You wake up in the morning, go to wherever your gas, who is your gas provider, gas station, fill your tank, you're good. And then at that point, you are too comfortable to drive as long as you can to a certain extent, right? But then maybe you're on a highway, you start going, and then it feels like, it's constantly going down. Your oil level is going down. You're still feeling comfortable until it gets to that point where it's like unread. And now to others, that could be the threshold like, absolutely not. Listen, my car does not tell me how many miles I have left once the red oil indicator comes in. By oil, I meant gas indicator comes in. I'm from Nigeria. We call it oil, not gas. Gas is an American thing. Anyway, uh, um, Once the red indicator comes up, that's it for me. I am not going to risk it. I'm finding the next gas station because my car doesn't even tell me how many miles I have left, and I'm not about to have my car stop right in the middle of the highway. That's the threshold of whoever the driver is. The threshold for them is just that red indicator, go to the next gas station. Then maybe you have other people like me who will look at the red and we're like, yeah, it's fine. I have like an additional 100 miles ahead. Is it true? Is it not? I don't know, but maybe my risk tolerance is different. As such, my threshold is different. And then we also have those with like maybe even optimized monitoring capacity, where even though it's red, it is still telling them like, okay, you have 50 miles left, you have 30 miles left, you have 20 miles left. You see 20 miles left, it's completely flat, but your car says you have 20 miles left. You pull your Google Maps, look at the next gas station, it says it's in the next 15 minutes, and you're like, okay, we're good. I'm just gonna keep moving. Or you pull your Google Maps and then you look it up, it says, nope, there is no gas station 25 miles ahead. Now you have to start thinking of how am I going to get 5 miles out of this? Do I turn off the AC? Do I do this? Right? So all of those are kind of the threshold definition. But what is the risk indicator? The risk indicator is that red signal that comes up. It is also the indicator as the sticks goes flat completely as you're monitoring your gas. Those are all part of the risk indicators. So how do you define what are your KRIs within organization? Now that we understand what is considered a risk indicator, how do we go about it, right? We will talk about that in as well in the next topic. But again, just to recap, key risk indicators are basically used to measure risk in comparison to a defined threshold. Again, it means you have to define what your threshold is to be able to achieve that, to be able to successfully monitor anything, even though there are key risk indicators, you have to define your threshold. And then from an organizational perspective, it could be just an alert. It could be a siren. It could be an alarm. These are all monitoring mechanisms, right? Okay, any question on this before I move forward? Great. So from organizational perspective, how do you select what are your key risk indicators? Obviously for the vehicle, they have made it easy for us. If you're looking at it from whatever kind of vehicle you have, motorcycle, obviously on a bicycle, I don't know if that applies, but you have a car, you're looking at it, you have a motorcycle, you're looking at it, at least it's been already identified for us in the sense of we have the risk indicator right there in front of us in the dashboard, right? Do we have the threshold? Sort of. Some vehicles will kind of even put it, a sign, something like this. This is, just a second. This is like, let's say this is your gas tank, right? This is F full. I don't know what they call here. And then you'll see like something like all the way here. And then over here is color coded red, right? That's the company trying to define like, hey, this is your threshold. But hey, at the same time, there are people like me that will want the threshold to be here, you know? But at the same time, the key risk indicator has been identified as this tool. The threshold for some could be here. For me, it could be here. I've seen people, I kid you not, that as soon as their car is at like half tank, no, the next gas station, they do not understand or they do not believe in that concept of there is no gas. I think it's common, especially in the trucking business, right? Um, so how do you select your risk indicators? And before selecting the risk indicators themselves, you absolutely need to select things that are meaningful. So you are going to select a meaningful set of controls to monitor. Just like your vehicle, do you monitor every single thing? Not really. Do you monitor the meaningful ones? Yeah, maybe flat tire, gas, overheat. Uh, what next? Um, I'm trying to think. Speed, I guess, unless you are someone else who doesn't care about speed. But all of those are kind of considered meaningful controls to really monitor, right? But for regular vehicles, do they provide you with the weight? Not really. Like I would say for at least small conventional vehicles for ours that we use on day to day, not really. Why? Because weight is not considered a major thing when it comes to our daily commute vehicles. For trucks, is weight an issue? Absolutely. Is it included as part of the dashboard and the set of controls to monitor? Yeah, some of them do, right? And we have gotten to a place where the more controls we are able to monitor, the more knowledgeable we are about the state of our vehicles, right? Some of them, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a modern control that lately has become oh, tire pressure. I can tell you, go back to the olden vehicles, not even that old, like anything pre-2000 does not really provide insight into PSIs, like whether if your tire pressure is um, at the right level or not. These days, most modern cars, they do provide that. That's additional control to monitor, right? Then consistent areas to measure, right? Now imagine if we have that oil indicator. Again, gas indicator. God. Anyway, the gas indicator also being the tool to provide information on the PSI. That's the tire pressure. Assuming we are on the analog way of things, right? Like the one I kind of drew earlier is more analog. So you have a stick and a measuring thing, and it's meant to be what informs you on the gas left in your tank. It's also meant to inform you on the weight. It also meant to inform you on the tire pressure and whatsoever. It starts becoming chaotic, right? As such, every single monitoring mechanism must be consistent, right? That of gas is only showing gas. Same thing. If you are using, say, Splunk to monitor audit logs, fine, so be it. And then you configure a single dashboard to provide you with that, and also a single dashboard that shows these are the logs identifying these systems and these people that the activity logs for this. That's perfectly fine. But then you have the same section in the dashboard presenting you with additional information. Maybe one or two might make sense, but the more it becomes convoluted, the more it becomes hard to measure, right? As such, the indicators must be consistent. Good indicators of health from risk management program. Again, similar to that one, indicators could differ, right? I mentioned earlier that one indicator for the gas tank could just be this is it, this is full, and this is your gas at low. But that's it. You only have a stick, no additional information. So you might see it right here, the stick, but can you quantify how many gas you have left or how many miles you have left? Not really. So optimized one could be maybe the book manual identify like, hey, the minute you reach this point, you only have 40 miles left. So maybe I will say if I see the stick at the half level, I can say 20 miles. But guess what's even much better these days? Maybe we don't even have this. We have a digital thing where it tells us like, hey, this is full, this is low. The minute it gets to this level, your car turns into you have 50 miles left, 49 miles, 48, right? So they are all good indicators. Obviously, you will want to select an indicator that is meaningful, but here's one question, and please, I am looking for one person. Or, I mean, you know what? Anybody can answer. If you want to turn it chaotic, so be it. Just keep it really short. From a monitoring perspective, should we always go for the best indicators? Like I just told you right now, obviously, when you are buying a car, you look at it from here 50 miles, 49, 48. Wow, that's amazing. Like, seriously, it's more informed than this. But does that make it the best for you? Yes or
No.
no? Why?
This is Jonathan. They have to be tailored to the environment because it can get very expensive very quickly if you just default log everything.
Okay, that's one. Tailored. Okay. Another person? Any other one? By the way, who was that? I think, is that you, Josh?
This is
Or
Jonathan.
Jonathan? Hey, Jonathan. Yeah. All right, tailored, okay. Any other person?
I agree with him on that. This is Josh.
Okay, Josh, okay. Is there anyone who disagree? Okay, not really. It has to present value to the project. Yes. I'll even take it beyond the project and say it has to be valuable to the business. Agreed. So everybody, like I 100% agree with Josh, Jonathan, and Alicia. Just because we have a very, very good indicator does not mean it adds value to the business. It might be the most expensive indicator, and then we will start spending so much in monitoring that we actually have information we do not need anymore. Let me give you an example on that. A couple of months ago, I was chatting. Actually, this truly happened. Sold my car completely because I felt like, hey, it's COVID. I don't need it. It's sitting down. It's a depreciating asset. Has no value to me. I don't go anywhere. My wife has a car. We are locked at home. As such, I have my motorcycle for just little here and there, right? Hardly go out. I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna let it go because either way, it's just depreciated. Now that's me. But then I figured as well, like, if I'm going to get another car, am I really going to get another car with GPS, navigation, all of these fancy things? Not really. I kid you not, but that is me. Why? Because I am now of the opinion of infotainment entirely. It's a scam. Like they are one of the things that I feel you buy a car today, 2 years later, the map is no longer the most up-to-date map. You hardly use it. You still have your phone on the dashboard. I might even invest more on a car with CarPlay because I can now connect my phone. But the idea of buying a car with like maps, absolutely not. Same thing, same concept, right? That's because it doesn't add value to me. Because by spending it, I see like I'm just throwing money away. So an organization might decide to invest into the most robust, most meaningful tool, but unless it really takes them to the place they want to go and it makes sense, it could be a waste of resource from a value perspective, right? Maybe they need the least amount of information to take it forward. So again, this was kind of a quick test in the sense of if you are, like if you did not understand why the heck we are saying it has to be tailored, it has to be like, yes, it's the best indicator, but it does not necessarily mean the best for the business until after I explained, then I would say it is fine that you're unable to understand it, but the objective is for you out of this class to be able to understand that just because it is a good indicator, just because it provides the best information, does not mean it's the best for the business because it doesn't translate to profit. I will tell you another thing. Same question if you throw it to someone who is maybe completely from a 100% technical background with zero business acumen or kind of organizational understanding, guess what they will tell you? They will tell you, yeah, absolutely, yes, it's the best. Just get it to me. I will just be drinking my coffee, looking at the dashboard, and it automates everything. It's the most optimized. I don't need to do anything. That's because they are thinking from their own shop, right? If you put it entirely in the business, it might not. All right. KRI as well help actually identify gaps. They truly do, especially by areas that can be influenced by management, right? You look at it, you see where are the places that we can optimize from a lot of angles. Let me give you one. It could be that, we invested in, let me use my car analogy here, right? Let's say we decided to go for the vehicle that does not provide anything. Actually, I'm going to change it a little bit. Let's say I am in the trucking business, right? And I know there is a requirement for, is it weight? Do they call it weight? But for the truck weight, right? On the highway. And let's say my tool is very analog, such that I'm unable to see anything on within the vehicle that tells me like, okay, my weight has either gone up or down or something like that. Maybe I'm no longer in compliance, right? And for me to do that, I have to constantly stop and kind of pay to get weighed again in those weighing stations. But because I'm stopping continuously after every 30 minutes, it is impacting whatever is in the truck to before it gets delivered, right? Like it's impacting the delivery because maybe on a 10-hour journey, I'm now spending 15 hours, right? And as such, we're unable to provide a one-day delivery from a business perspective because I have to do this. Now, maybe one-day delivery has a market value, or even like if we're able to provide a one-day delivery, it will actually be make a huge difference with our competitors, such that we might even take all their customers. It might add our revenue by $1 million in a year. Wow. Okay, cool. Now, at $1 million in a year, now investing in trucks that will allow us to have those metrics that allows the driver to have less stops, right? And less expense when it comes to weighing and whatsoever, might actually maybe be the truck is $25,000 additional from what we currently have. Maybe what we have right now costs 50,000, and now we are buying, we are spending 75 to be able to get a truck that does all of this. There is value in that. But guess what it does? Because we're able to identify these as part of the metrics that we need to measure and whatsoever, we are also able to quantify the impact it's having on us and what we are missing. It's the only reason why we're unable to provide one-day delivery, right? So that is how it is going to then be influenced by either management, or you use it to influence the management by saying this does not make sense. Let's invest in this because it allows us to achieve this and this. Is anybody lost?
No, just a quick comment, Professor. Yeah, I agree with you, and that's a good example. I know in DoD, those areas influenced by management, we call a commander's critical reporting indicators, which I think is to your point about it has to be very aligned to the business.
Absolutely, absolutely. I didn't want to use the .gov example because most times, hardly do we make rational and decisions based on spendings, honestly, within the government side. We hardly use money. I mean, DoD, I think the cap of the cap, like the main thing will be around national security, right? If we are to say, oh, this exposes us more, by taking on this approach, we are able to now be safer and whatsoever that makes sense. But yes, I agree with you. That is that part where I was saying earlier, you find the government using so much of a qualitative approach to things rather than a quantitative. But yeah, from the business side, especially for profit, you have to know how to translate whatever nuance this. I don't care if it's word, text, whatsoever. If you can put this to the dollar value to it, yeah, good luck trying to penetrate the executives in corporate America. Did I get that wrong? Please, I'm waiting for anybody to tell me like, nah, that's just a bunch of BS. You're absolutely wrong. It's not all about the making profit. That's what I usually think. I don't play there, but I'm looking for another perspective.
It's either profits or lives, right? If we're going to say national security.
Yeah. So I was saying like national security more for us in the government side. I was talking about like going into the corporate America, make sure you're able to translate all of these text and the number jumbo and whatever it is you're communicating to dollar value. If you are not able to do that, even as a consultant, it starts becoming a bit challenging for you to really get through those executives. That's what we are saying.
You know, real quick, what I thought was interesting too was your example of a car and a dashboard, right? So you take a look at where we were 20, 30 years ago with dashboards and the critical reporting items that are available now, and where we are with cyber and I really think that both industry and DoD are struggling with, you know, what are those critical key risk indicators, right? So that was interesting. Thank you.
That's absolutely true. That's why I was saying earlier, like most cars that are pre-2000s are usually analogous. So for that, I mean, who cares, right? But now as we are having all of these technology embedded into vehicles, presenting additional risks. Now we constantly have to identify additional risk indicators. So there's a need for more information. And then and honestly speaking, it is one of the race. People keep saying technology is outpacing security and whatsoever. I am not of the opinion that necessarily technology is outpacing security technical implementations, but rather the risk indicators, because you have to have the new technology to be able to identify the risk and understand the risk it presents. Because we are not facing challenge on building the security tools. Once we identify the risk indicators, then building the tool, I mean, come on. Like building the tool is not the rocket science, honestly. It's identifying the different risks that new technologies are coming with. But yeah, okay. So now that we have identified the risk identifiers themselves, right? We know our key risk identifiers, KRI, and whatsoever. I think I have successfully messed up everybody's understanding of what KRIs are. So if you go to your next meeting and they're talking about KRI, maybe you will not see it only from a business perspective. You will see it from like, listen, this is a compliance thing. This is a security thing. But yeah, all right. Uh, how do we make sure like that what we have identified truthfully are effective? We have identified the key risk indicators, but what really said like having the dashboard for the oil? Again, you guys just used to get used to me saying oil. For gas indicators and whatsoever that shows us miles, yeah, we understand this. We understand the value it adds. We understand the comfort it provides and whatsoever. But truthfully, how do we know that this is effective? And guess what? A lot of us are usually hesitant to adopt new technology, not because we are scared of it, but because we are concerned about the control effectiveness, right? Like think of IoT devices, for example. Finally, I caved in and got an Alexa, but a lot of us were not concerned about, oh, Alexa is a bad thing, or Alexa is this. No, it's because with the coming of IoT devices, Alexa, Google Home, whatsoever, we have identified that there are additional risks. We are exposed. It gives access to this. There are so many attack surfaces and whatsoever. Now, are we comfortable with that? Most of us are not, and most of us in the sense of we don't really understand it in depth to accept it, but then it's slowly becoming the norm and people are becoming comfortable with it, right? But are we accepting it because it has become, this is the new thing. Everybody has accepted it, so I'm consuming it. Or are we accepting it because it has been around for such a while, certain history has been built, we kind of begin building this comfort level by knowing that the controls that are in place to mitigate those risks are effective. I will tell you it's the latter. Let me tell you when I decided to start getting into these IoT things. And then, by the way, if you're not into it, don't open that can of worms. The minute you get that first automated bulb, that's it. You always start thinking of, okay, now I need to buy this. How? So I can talk to it. You know what? I need to find a way to lock my garage automatically. I hate that. So yeah, then open that kind of worms if you're not into it. But for me personally, I have always been hesitant, not because of the technology, but because of the trust issues. Trust in the sense of there was no single regulation in place that says the monitoring that all of these devices are doing, listening to what we are talking about. And when it started, go look it up. You actually don't need to talk to Alexa or whatsoever for her to respond, like to be constantly listening to you. No, there is this active listening thing. As such, it's constantly listening to what you're saying, right? So at the time, I was like, I'm not sure. I'm comfortable just pretty much my life at home that I'm meant to be to really relax, to watch my movies, whatsoever, and there's this constant ear listening to me. But it's not even about the ear listening to me. What is being used, right? Who is using it? Are they selling it? Whatsoever. I didn't become comfortable with it until there was a law in place that requires every single provider of devices with microphones to act. There are just limitations to it. That's the same reason Facebook sells yours. I'm not kidding. That's why people usually say like, how is Facebook listening to what I'm saying? I just spoke about pasta and now I'm saying this new pasta recipe. The absolute truth is the mics pick it up. They actually do pick it up. Um, as such, I was like, no. But then Amazon kind of really provides some comfort in the sense of they put some controls in places and assurance, but then there were also even laws passed around IoT that anybody who kind of purposely sell, I wouldn't say sell, but rather use it to their advantage such that it impacts the consumer, there are consequences for that. And that's when I just started becoming comfortable. Guess what? There's still nothing when it comes to Facebook chat, especially that Facebook Messenger. Go look it up. A lot of people have reverse engineered it. At the time, they were saying like, okay, there's this active listening with it that is constantly listening to what you're saying. I think Amazon's response to that was to give you access so that you can actually go in and delete it. So if you own Alexa, you can actually go in and basically delete everything, right? So all of those things, it's around the effectiveness of the control. How do we measure that? That is when, if you have ever heard of smart metrics, that is meant to enable us kind of have this methodology of one, identifying meaningful KRIs, but then also we have the KRI effectiveness, right? By impact, effort, reliability, sensitivity, and repeatability. Impact, which has to do with indicators of risk with high business impact, right? They are kind of like more likely to be KRIs. So if you're more looking into KRI and trying to identify, okay, this indicator that we have identified, is it effective? You look at how it impacts the business, right? You also look into effort, meaning the different indicators kind of that are equivalent in sensitivity, right? And basically, when you look at that, you look at which of the different indicators is easier to measure and maintain. I will tell you this, if you have, this is actually a security thing. Security should not, is not meant to be hard. If you have approach to things where the effort you need to put to get to destination Z in this is harder than the other one, most people tend to think like, if it's hard, then it's secured. No, it should be easier, I would say. If there are two methodologies, one is harder, the other is easier, but they all take you to the same destination, there is no really additional risk and whatsoever, always go with the one that is effortless. Because if it's easier to measure, then it's easier to maintain. Yep, Jonathan, that is seriously everybody in this class. I don't know, maybe I should prescribe it. Did I just say prescribe as this? I'm a pharmacist, but anyway. I know. On the brass, hey, I'm a doctor, I can prescribe that. Anyway, Social Dilemma, the movie on Netflix, it's amazing. One of my nieces is glued to TikTok, I kid you not. And I am trying to get her to watch it. And it's as if she knows it's going to impact her. She's just running away. But seriously, it's great. Oh, it's trending? I didn't know that. But yeah, I watched it the day it dropped. And it's kind of funny. All of us in big tech, like my colleagues at Microsoft and whatsoever, we were chatting, and one of us is saying like, yeah, I'm switching, like they have switched to DuckDuckGo. And I'm like, hold on a second, what happened to Bing? You're not gonna Bing it anymore? And they were just like, but that's the truth, right? Seriously, Social Dilemma, it's really a good thing that provides a lot of perspectives, especially around the big tech. So I highly recommend it. Or maybe one day, if there is some time, we'll just, I wish the class is open in the sense of a lot of people are responding and there's no much impact in going into the classes. We'll just order pizza and just literally turn it into high school. Have a movie night. Who cares? Anyway, effort, reliability. Obviously, you want whatever it is to be reliable. Sensitivity. Again, the sensitivity is around the indicator must be capable of accurately identifying what it needs to identify. And I kind of just gave this deep side of what is accurate, because you don't want to tweak your device around so much accuracy to a point that it is not usable. Let me give you an example. We have this with biometrics, right? What I can't remember, what did they call it? There is this, oh God. There's something about biometrics where it's a balance between if the tool is very, like, if it's so
Yeah,
sensitive.
the errors rate. Correct.
Thank you very much, the error rate, right? If it's too sensitive, then it's quite difficult to access, especially around biometrics. Like, let's use a thumbprint, for example. If you calibrate your tool to actually be so sensitive that it must really pick the most granular detail of the thumbprint, then guess what happens? It starts delaying, and the usability becomes hard because maybe there's a little bit of grease on your thumb and it kind of is not reading it, right? So you gotta rub it and things like that. That's around sensitivity. So you want to find the balance that works for you. Okay, repeatability is a big deal, especially with that. Either control, and when measuring, you don't want something that is randomized in the sense of today it works, tomorrow it doesn't. So you want, if you're monitoring a tool, like if you have a monitoring tool, if the scenario is exactly as it happened yesterday, then the result must be the same. There has to be some form of pattern. It should show the trend and whatsoever. Keep in mind, this does not apply to tools that are meant to learn, like machine learning, AI, all of those things. No, we're talking about KRIs and the tools for monitoring, right? If I log in at 5 a.m., 10 seconds into my machine, and an alarm started like, it's not the, it's not your time to work. I'm supposed to log in at 9 a.m., not 5 a.m., blah, blah, blah. It kind of gave that report. It should be able to do the same tomorrow, unless the tool is meant to learn. I'll be honest with you, our field, especially around the RMF, has not gotten to a place where we are saying monitoring should be based on learning mechanisms. You can achieve that with like false negatives, right? Or rather, actually more on false positives. I wouldn't advise you to look into the false negatives, but more on false positives, right? There's a little bit of machine learning in there where some devices are, if you mark it as like, yeah, this is not an error because it reported it as an error, then you can mark it as, okay, tomorrow it should not report the same thing. There is a difference. It does not mean that the tool is not reporting it, but it's meaning like the tool is intelligent enough to know that even if it reports it, your action is this. There is a clear difference. Okay, optimization. It's just going to revolve around that. If you're looking to optimize your KRIs, these are the parts that you should look into it. Definitely ensure it's accurate and meaningful, right? So as always, the reporting KRIs must be optimized just to ensure that the correct data is being collected, right? As such, your threshold, even though I haven't written it in there, but your threshold must be set correctly. Correctly is so vague, I know it, because guess what? You need to quantify it from a business perspective, right? Nobody can tell you, oh, this is the correct threshold. Only the business mission, goals, objectives, alignment, all of the words that we have been talking about, right? All right. So what from our field in terms of IT, what are some examples of KPIs? Network availability, right? Customer satisfaction is a good indicator as well. But now we're talking about performance indicators, not KRIs, right? So what is the difference? Anybody want to volunteer high level? 30 seconds. What is the delineation between KRI and KPI?
KRI, this is Fortune KRI. It's like a risk indicator. It predicts like future events, from my understanding, or not, yeah, future event from happening. And KPI is more so like a measurement for kind of like a goal, like performance.
Okay, okay. I agree with that. I also see Alicia saying it's more performance focused. Yes, absolutely agree. So I want to say this, right? Performance versus risk. Yeah, I mean, that's like the literally that's that's the difference, Cleandra, in even the statement, right? Key performance indicators and key risk indicators. But I'm trying to also see where you're coming from in terms of the performance is like more, I don't want to say forward looking because risk is also part of forward looking, but it's more identifying based on what happened, right? So the performance, again, coming back, I guess I'm trying to define performance.
I think
But
it gives more like bigger scope as a business justification for the benefits of having these sensors or tools to come up with key risk indicating numbers. So
yes,
it's a matter of overseeing the objectives of applying your policies, your guidelines, your procedures, at your organization as a whole. So it's a combination of several key risk indicators combined, leading to a big picture of performance overview.
I'm trying to see how the key risk indicators will become the performance, because when I think of performance indicators, it's more around like a measurement of how well a process is performing, right? Like how well is it performing? So I'm trying to see how does the risk indicators, what we have identified as a potential, for lack of a better word, danger,
What I
translate to how well performance is. But I will give you just 30 seconds if you wanted to add something really
Sure.
quick.
What
Here are, go ahead.
I'm sorry. What I see it is from a real example that one of the agencies I work with, they are in charge of overseeing other agencies. That key risk indicators that being applied for these agencies will justify the financial expenses that being taken from the government to those agencies in a neutral way. So these risks coming out of these agencies, whether it comes to the compliance, whether of the out of date sensors, purchases, all that stuff, it will lead to a performance overview of these agencies that will lead the mother agency to kind of like having an idea of where to spend the money, where to do procurements and purchases, where to do more hiring, where needs more effort as a percentages in comparison with the other agencies.
So as you mentioned that, I agree with you, but I still do not see it as a KPI. I see it more as this part that we talk about, because you have finished identifying the key risk indicators. It shows you those improvement points and where the gaps are and how you should do, right? Let me give you this example and you let me know if we are talking about the same thing, right? So we've been talking about this gas tank, right? I don't know why I'm using this, honestly. And funny enough, this is the first class that I'm using gas as an example. I usually go with something else, most times speed. Anyway, we've been talking about this, right? Where this is full tank, this is low tank. And we said like the digitized version will tell you like you have 50 miles left, 49 miles left, 48 left. So when I look at this, I look at this threshold. And when it comes here, I see this as a KRI, right? A key risk indicator, like, listen, you gotta go get gas. If you don't, I mean, you and I are gonna sleep on the highway. That's what I see as KRI. But then the other side of the KPI, the inverted side is, if the vehicle tells us like, hey, this part, once you reach this, you have 50 miles left. And every single time I reach this part, right? When I get to that 50 mile, it stops. That's a performance for me. Or if the vehicle, let's say we have a Toyota, right? Let's say it's a Toyota and it says your full tank is 30 gallons, right? And with that 30 gallons, you can have 150 miles per gallon, right? If we are able to achieve this with this, like if we are able to achieve the 150 miles per gallon, that is what I see as a key performance indicator, right? We have identified that, yes, we're able to achieve this, meaning we have already initially identified what the matrix, or rather what the threshold, or not even a threshold, but what the indicator and what level we want to get to, and our ability to get to that is what I consider a KPI. Anybody think otherwise?
Yeah, what I would say is kind of like what the other cohort was talking about with the federal agencies, right? There's really not much distinction between KPI and KR based on the definition that you provide, right? And yeah, I kind of saw
that. Talking about our .gov sector now? Are we talking about how the government sector sees KPIs?
No, so I really think it's in my mental model, in what I'm hearing right now is that how you define that parameter, and if you align it to the business, there's really not much difference between a risk indicator and performance if you defined it correctly with that perspective of the value or the customer or the business is what I was thinking.
I disagree with that, and I will tell you this. First, for most of us that are, just a second, so sorry. For most of us that are within the government side, I'll be honest with you, the government sucks at KPIs. We hardly have a lot of performance indicators. We are just running the machine, and when things happen, good. But I see performance indicators more towards the goal. If today I am Amazon, right? And I've identified as part of my KRI, the risk indicator is listen. The minute we get less than 100 people, customers, there is a risk. I mean, we can't even pay salary if we have less than 100 customers. But a performance indicator is, oh, utopia for us, or good place for us is once we have 150 customers, everything is good. That is that is good profit for us. I see this as the matrix for measuring KPI and this as the matrix for measuring KRI.
No, I agree with that. But to my point, it's how you define it, right? So, yeah, I think we're on the same sheet. Yep.
Yes. Okay, cool. I mean, I see a lot of people also commenting in the chat. I'll just move forward. Yes, thank you, Jonathan. That is great. Because of KRI, we will be able to identify KPI. And I think that is what Harry and Nawaris, you are both saying, right? We use KRIs to define our KPIs.
And I think
Well,
the KPIs,
in fact, yeah, I think that there's obviously a correlation between key performance indicators and key risk indicators. And the one you show there for a KPI of network availability, you know, there are two measures of network performance, which include throughput and delay. And you can have a situation, for example, where a distributed denial of service attack on a network causes those performance indicators to drop below a certain threshold where you know you've got you know, something going on and you're in a risk situation because, you know, as a result of that denial of service attack, you may no longer be meeting the performance requirements of your customers.
So I agree with you on that. And please, everybody, I know we are spending time here. While I agree with that, I think it's also justified that we are spending some time here because you will find that ISACA rely a lot on KPIs and KRIs. The government side, we are okay with identifying KRIs. We suck at KPI. Business world, so much KPI, less KRI. And the reason why I'm talking about this, even with the example right now with network availability, you can have a KPI without identifying what is the KRI until it happens. I wasn't sure, was it you, Harry, that kind of added the last comment? But good, we can move forward. Unless there is anybody who is not clear on what we are talking about, but I feel like we are all saying the same thing. In terms of one thing we know is there is a clear relationship between the KRIs and the KPIs, but the KPIs are more on that forward looking in terms of, again, I don't want to say the performance, but measurement of how well things are going. And then the KRIs are those identification of what is the danger, right? Same thing. KPIs, we use the same smart metrics to also measure them as well as ensure they are valuable. Because of KRI outage and web up, web down, now I need a KPI for load balancer and web proxy. I see. Okay, customer satisfaction. McDonald's, maybe next to my house. That customer satisfaction there, I just know whenever I go, like the machine, the ice cream machine is broken as such. Like, no, they always get zero. Absolutely, just zero. That's a customer satisfaction, right? I don't feel like they do anything. But guess another thing. Number of resolved complaints could be, it says resolved. That could be the KPI. In this scenario for the KRI, I will say number of submitted complaints, right? Instead of the resolved ones. Then this will be more of the KRI because once we have 100 complaints, that's a no-go. But if we're able to every month to resolve 50 complaints, that's good. All right. Moving on. One thing all of this tells me is what? KRI, KPI, all of that, blah, blah, blah. We need data. Is there anyone who disagree? And beyond the data, data collection needs extraction, right? We have to find a way to extract the data. And what methodology are we using? You'll start hearing of OSINT. No. Take the knives back. We are not talking about now about intelligence gathering for some of you in here. So we're not talking about all of those. But at the same time, the data collection from our monitoring tools, the logs, the whatsoever, all of those are data, right? What are the sources? Could be this. Prior assessments, documentation, tickets, especially around customer service, it could be tickets, right? Number of tickets, complaints, and whatsoever. Audit and incident reports, we touch upon that. Logs, right? These are considered like internal data sources. Is that it? Nope. It depends. A lot of internal data source. When it comes to external, what are some our good external data sources? Obviously, media, definitely. CERT and CERT, that is the Computer Emergency Readiness Team and the Incident Response Team, right? The regulatory bodies, peer organizations, especially with this, it's always a good thing to really take a look at what is a similar organization going through and how does it either result into a KPI or KRI, right? I saw something yesterday. Especially around big tech, it's kind of funny to me. Apple are putting this strict kind of regulation. Now, this is just my viewpoint. Someone might disagree, but they are changing really their policies on the Apple Store, right? Especially around games. I think they are saying they are going to remove Fortnite, or they even did, and whatsoever. And the way they are now taxing app developers is completely different, right? And including, some are calling it's the new form of monopoly. I don't know, maybe we might have to go all the way back in time and ask, what is the name of this guy that started Standard Oil? Geez, not Vanderbilt. Who was it? One of the major people that started this oil extraction. I'm sorry? Okay, I can't remember their name. There's this, oh God, he's a popular person. He lived his time along with people like Carnegie Mellon. No, not Carnegie. Carnegie was more into steel, but they were kind of Rockefeller. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Yeah. So some are saying it's turning into the same monopoly like Rockefeller, right? Where Apple is now pushing their own things, making the Apple Store for developers really hard to stay in, to kind of provide additional services, prioritizing their own tools and whatsoever. Look it up. So many documentations around that. By the way, I'm a big fan of Carnegie. Honestly, I think that person have done so much in the US. He built more than 1,000 libraries. So people are saying that around Apple, but guess what? Around that peer organization monitoring, it was really funny. I just saw it. I think it was either today or yesterday. Google are basically going to change the laws around their Google Store. And they were saying something about 30% taxation on every single developer and whatsoever. So that's that part of peer organization. Apple were able to do it. They got away with it. That's a key performance indicator. Now Google is trying to do it, right? So that's an external data source in terms of approach. Now, when you look at also other sources like media reports, for example, maybe the health sector, just give an example. Maybe the health sector might see like, you know what? We have Emory in Atlanta, and then maybe there's another random hospital. Let's just call it a random place in the UK, right? And over here in the US, and they got like our entire business model, how we do things is basically similar, like literally copy and paste, right? But then these guys just got hit by this crazy ransomware, and it basically took them down, God forbid, but patients died, lost a lot of business whatsoever. If Emory have any iota of sense, they will pay attention to that and make sure that that same type of ransomware and that whatever happened becomes a key risk indicator to them, right? So again, who is supposed to do that? You, the risk professional. I will tell you this, the doctors will not do that. And the CEO will hire you to pay attention to that. All right. So monitoring controls. Why do we do that? I think everybody understands this right now. Basically, like we do that to provide feedback, right? Just so we continuously improve our risk response as well as identify the controls that are working correctly, which is the same thing as working correctly as being effective, right? Now, monitoring controls, they say it has 6 steps. Why do we have these six steps? The first thing first is just because you are the most amazing risk professional or the good sysadmin does not give you the right to just be and make the decision on your own without contacting the risk control owners and the stakeholders. Why? I can decide right now that I'm a network engineer, I have a network background. It makes absolute sense to me that we have this amazing firewall. You know what? I want to keep constantly looking at the bandwidth. And I'm going to basically position our tool to look at the bandwidth. But guess what? It might not be the most important thing. It might be completely irrelevant. The risk owners might actually be more concerned about making sure that we are monitoring and nobody have access to certain type of data, right? As such, should I be monitoring the bandwidth from a speed perspective, or should I be monitoring the access control list, including making sure that traffic that comes in and out, not necessarily from a speed perspective, but rather from IP addresses, whatsoever kind of thing, right? So we have to identify and check in with the risk control owners and the stakeholders. We have to engage with the stakeholders, right? To communicate to them why we are doing this monitoring and reporting. Again, align. I feel like all of these, like it says align and enterprise approach. We don't even need to read it. We all know in this class, if there's one thing that we are all common is we have all turned into consultants where we are now using words like align, leverage. I know, I apologize, kind of suck. You finish your daily meetings, they keep telling you like, yeah, let's align our reasoning, let's align this. And now you're in class and your freaking instructor is also telling you align. Yep. Establish the information security monitoring process and procedure. This especially, right? We can't just monitor without a defined way of monitoring. What happens if I am just doing it my way and I get hit by the bus? And the next new person cannot even read what I'm doing, right? They can monitor it. So does that make sense? Absolutely no. We need to have a procedure on how we're doing so we're all on the same page. Life cycle, change control around, should we just, let's use an example of the procedure. We have one procedure. Should just one person just change it? Absolutely not. Should we have a kind of CCB, right? Like where for this procedure to change, we need the buy-in of the system administrator, the legal department, the CISO, depending on what it is, right? how many people need to have to say yes before we change the procedure? Because it's going to impact them. Life cycle management. So we are monitoring the controls. Are we going to define when is it going to end? When are we going to change it? I'll be honest with you, hardly do we focus a lot on life cycle management until it starts giving us problems. But I can tell you one thing. We, especially the corporate world, including the government, around our devices like say laptops, when it is coming up out of warranty, that is when we begin changing it, right? That's why some of us, we are constantly having devices every 2 years, every 3 years. The minute its warranty is coming up, we are changing devices. Why is that? That's around the life cycle management. Because if it is completely out of warranty, then the organization is now have to either start staffing the IT staff that are going to continuously do that, start dealing with breaking down SSDs, RAMs, whatsoever, like, right? The parts are all not under warranty, and now maybe it's literally Fatu's cupcake business. If I can remember, it was Fatu at a cupcake business. She doesn't want to deal with that. She doesn't need to hire a system administrator as such. She's just going to, the minute it's out of warranty, either extend it or get another, right? So request, prioritize, allocate resources for monitoring. These are all touch upon. Types of monitoring, we just touched upon it on the previous slide. You can do a self-assessment on your own, automated, third-party audits, looking at you. Let me see who do I know. Fortune, I do know that you are a consultant in that part. So I don't know if you do audits, but yeah. We have internal auditors and external. I do not know if the corporate world have a lot of internal auditors, but my fellow people here that are conversant in the Navy side of things, we do know of all of those Navy qualified validators. They are internal auditors, right? They are considered, yeah. And then we also have the external like auditors, companies like Coalfire, Kratos, whatsoever, right? Sometimes even just the CISO shop could be an internal third-party audit, right? Where they are making sure things are correct and doing those due diligences. Okay, I'm trying to see if I can get to the end before we take the break and then we come back. Control assessment types. Same thing. For anybody who doesn't know audit. Hardly when it comes to security perspective and within the government side, we don't really say audit. We focus on using the word assessment, at least for getting an ATO. That is for like the NIST RMF. That's because the 800-37 document, which you are all going to read, did not really use the word audits. It focused on calling it assessment, and it also called it auditors, assessors. There is a little difference, but kind of same thing. Right? Well, I shouldn't say it's the same thing. Honestly, there is a little difference between audit and assessors. Especially assessors, they look a lot more into. So auditors hardly give recommendations. Assessors do when it comes to security controls. So I'm limiting it here before people in the financial sector say, no, whenever I do my SOC, I give recommendations. No, we're talking about security controls. Vulnerability assessments, penetration tests, third-party assurances, these are all straight. Now, what are the results of control assessments, right? That is when you start hearing maturity model. What maturity models are, they indicate the maturity of an organization process. And when we talk about an organization process, it's, let's say, let me give you an example. Let's say Marymount today, right? Marymount. And then let's pick another school, maybe George Mason, right? George Mason. Let's say we have a measurement for how schools should be, how students should get enrolled, right? How long does it take? How long does it take for students to get enrolled into classes, right? And we have made it a model, like there is a standardization into that and whatsoever. And now we are measuring the maturity of schools based on this model, right? So we will say like, the ranking is 5 4, 3, 2, 1, where 1 is terrible and 5 is the best, right? And then we'll say, Marimon's ability to really onboard students, whether we're looking at it from a time perspective or whatsoever, but Marimon's ability to really follow this model is at 5. And Judge Mason's one is at 0, not even the one I said because it's terrible. Anyway, so based on that, I'm not saying Judge Mason is a bad school, by the way. Anyway, based on that, that is what we use maturity models for, right? And including the assessment. I have dumbed down this so heavily, right? But you will keep hearing like we have different types of maturity models out there. Recently, there's also another one that just came out, the CMMC within DoD. It is going to test all of these defense contractors, right, against the CMMC kind of model, where I will say every single defense contractor must satisfy CMMC before you're allowed to work with DoD. Anybody from who is very conversant in that? Because right now I know we don't even have practitioners that are able to take exams. We are yet to identify the assessors and auditors, but there is a body that is looking into doing that because just CMMC just came out. But then there are other maturity models out there, okay? Same thing around the capability maturity model. And for the capability maturity model, it's focused on organizations' capability to execute what they are, like the business they are in. So let's give an example. Amazon, Google, for example, maybe Microsoft, Azure. So this is AWS, GCP, and maybe Azure, right? Obviously, I'm going to pick mine. But part of the capability maturity model, the capabilities of each of these providers to actually, wow, can you guys read this? Let me make sure I'm writing well.
That's a little bit sketchy.
Yeah, I know, it's because I'm really not paying much attention into the writing. So we talk about Microsoft Azure, we talk about maybe AWS, Amazon AWS, we talk about Google, GCP, right? Part of capability, what are they all trying to do? Become a cloud service provider, right? Meaning they are providing you with cloud services, storage, all of these things, compute and whatsoever without you having to do it. Now, Microsoft capability to provide you with this, the cloud services that they are doing, right? That will be a standardized maturity model for measuring as part of that capability maturity model. So we'll maybe similar to the ranking I gave earlier from 5 to 0, 0 being incomplete, performed whatsoever, and then 5 being the optimized. Then you start having this ranking where Azure might be 5 and AWS will be 0, GCP will be 0. Yeah, you can say I work for Microsoft, so I'll go with Azure or whatever. So those are all capability models. Another one that didn't really sell themselves as capability model, but that's what I see them is Gartner, right? You keep hearing of that Gartner ranking where they are saying like, it's always like this. Something like, yeah, you are here, so you are one of the best. You're here, you suck, right? I can't remember what the kind of scale is, what they call this section. If anybody knows, feel free to remind us. But you'll see all the major players. I'm sorry?
Magic Quadrant.
The Magic Quadrant. Thank you very much. Yes, that's what Gartner calls it. But it's also a capability maturity model when you think of it, because they are doing their research, identifying those metrics that they are going to use to measure the provider's capability, right? Where if maybe this year Azure is sitting right here, it will actually turn into a selling point like, hey, we are top in the Magic Quadrant, something like that. Okay. Finally, we have already talked about this, a change to the IT risk profile, right? Annual organization review, monitoring and whatsoever. Meaning organizations like the risk practitioner, as a risk practitioner, you should always be alert, right, to changes that could really affect the risk profile. We touch upon risk profile, right? And yeah, it's just constantly paying attention to it. It starts becoming difficult when there are so many controls. Guess how we deal with that? That's why we have control what? Owners. They are responsible. And the person accountable means he has to make sure that the people responsible are doing their jobs, right? Because everything we just talk about in this ISACA part whatsoever, it's a lot. Like it truly, truly is a lot. How can one person do it? But guess what? Yes, you can. Do you do it from a responsibility perspective or accountability? Yeah, depends on your title, depends on your salary, depends on where you are, right? But that's also part of climbing the ladder. Okay. Finally, we touch upon proper and effective management of risk, right? Risk management is a never-ending process. That's just it. It's just a continuous process, continuous, continuous, continuous. The other day, I was chatting with someone. I was telling them risk management, like any field you are in. Well, I wouldn't say any, but most fields, especially those that have been regulated, you will find that you can always map what you are doing to that regulation. You're a medical doctor and you're seeing patients, you're whatsoever. I do not know if there is a government regulation, but I would assume like part of your license requirement is any patient that comes in, you have to ask them certain questions for diagnosis or whatsoever. So yeah, you're a medical doctor, you're doing all of these things, but guess what? It's also part of risk management because you have this, as much as I don't want to call it checklist, but there are some things that you need to check off. All right. So that's it. We're done with the ISACA part. Woohoo! We've touched on IT risk assessment, risk mitigation, and that's that. Should we take a 5 minutes? And
How
yes,
about 10 minutes?
oh no, but okay, let's take a 10 minutes. That's fine. Let's take a 10 minutes and then come back and then get into the other fun part of the class.
I have a
Good,
question,
everybody?
Doctor. Do you rather to wait after the break or just ask it now?
Wait, did you say after the break, am I going to wait or right now?
No, I have a question. Do you want me to wait after the break or
Yeah.
ask you right
Can
now?
you just give me just a minute, just trying to
Sure.
grab a bit of water, and I will be right back for us to
Thank you,
continue.
sir.
Does that work?
Of course. Thank you very much. Dr. Ibrahim, please. My question is like, speaking of the life cycle here, when you are
Mhm.
at the IT risk and control monitoring and reporting, when you monitor and control these key risk indicators, um, what happens when you find out that you have to replace some controls or you have to do modifications based on these um, numbers you see, right? Whether
Mhm.
qualitative or quantitative, do you have to go through the cycle again to make modification and you have to identify and assess and go back again, which is time consuming, or at the same phase you just modify a change while you are there?
You see, you mentioned something that pisses almost people out. Did I just say almost? But yeah, that pisses most people within the entire risk management field. That time consuming. It is time consuming because it is work. But yes, if you are changing any control, right, because you identify that it is no longer effective, obviously the new control that you are bringing into place, you also have to identify, does it have its own risk? And yes, if it does, can you assess that risk if it is acceptable to you or not or whatsoever, to identify how you are going to respond to it. Now that you have done that, how are you going to respond to the risk? And then you get it into the monitoring. Now let's put an example to that. Let us say you have a firewall, right? What type of firewall do you have? I'm like literally going to call them out, Cisco, right? Maybe you have maybe a Cisco ASA 5510, which is quite old now, right? Maybe it's network interfaces. By the way, do you come from a technical background? Because if not, I will then switch the example to something that is
Yes, technically
cool.
correct.
Maybe it has just 100 Mbps network interface card, right? But right now, you just subscribe to Verizon's 1 gigabit internet connection, and you realize you need it. You have grown, your business have grown beyond that little startup that need this and whatsoever. You have many employees, so many bandwidth and whatsoever. And then you look at it and you realize, like, listen, Everything about my Cisco device is good, other than just the network interface card is only supporting this. As such, I cannot provide, even though I'm subscribed to 1 gigabit per second, I cannot subscribe to it. So you know what? I'm just going to go into maybe a new amazing firewall. Again, well, since I called Cisco out, let me use them again. Maybe I'm going to switch to Cisco, maybe the ASA. I'm making numbers up. I do not know if there's anything like this. 8210, right? Because it supports up to 1 gigabit per second network interface card. It satisfies this on whatsoever. But did you change from the original 5510 to 8210? Yes, you did. Do they have different, maybe firmware? Maybe they do. Definitely new NIC. Maybe they have different power consumption. Maybe they whatsoever. So as part of doing this change, as a risk professional, and I'm basically making you answer your own question, right? Do you just pull this out and replace it with this without considering, is there an OS update change? Is the firmware different? Is this actually in, like, does this ASA 8210 support my existing infrastructure because I have this random switch? I also have this type of computers. Is it going to be compatible with them? Or no, Cisco did their own habit of closing everything to make it anything that is after the 5510 is not only proprietary, so you need a switch that is going to be, that is Cisco related for it to support this. All of these things, are you going to ask those questions or no?
Have to do, no, it's, you have to do the whole thing again.
Exactly. So by
The whole
asking those
cycle.
questions, what are you doing? That's the IT risk identification. And now, once we identify like, you know what? This ASA 8210 is not going to be compatible with our TP-Link switch that we have, which even though it supports 1 gigabit per second, it's not going to be compatible. And the 5510 no longer supports it, but we are getting this ASA 8210 for cheap. It's amazing. It's good. It does everything. It just is not going to support this. That is you part of doing that assessment on whatsoever you have assessed, like, sorry, you have identified on whatsoever. Now you look at it and it's like, you know what? The next other firewall that we will have that will support the TP-Link is going to cost us $1,000 more. But the TP-Link in its entirety, it's $200. And literally the network engineer we are going to bring in from outside, from maybe Verizon or whoever it is to configure it, is going to charge us $500. So maybe it's just $700 more. We'll just accept it. As such, what are you doing? You are accepting, right? So you have done your assessment and it has influenced your response to accept. Now that you have accepted, are you going to start continuing monitoring the 8510? I will assume so. Does that make sense?
Yes, doctor, pretty much. Thank you so much. It makes great sense.
Okay. Any other question? Anyone? I have one. Very informal. I'm looking for the. Wait, are we recording? I can pause
We
it.
are recorded and on a break in case you want to ask the whole group, doctor.
No, it's totally fine. I just want, from a KPI perspective, please feel free at this point before we get to the next part. If you want to send me and Dave only an email or whatsoever, please voice the improvement points where you feel like the feedback, right? If you think there are ways we can make the learning process different, or if my examples are like, what the heck is this person talking about? It's making no sense. Feel free to let me know.
No, no, at all, doctor. Your examples are really pretty much actual
Just
scenarios. But what I've seen it so far in my environment, the key risk indicators leading to a predictive key performance indicators. So the examples you brought, they are actual scenarios, like when you run out of gas, right? So instead of how I interpret it, instead of having like 30 miles left to reach your destination as a predictive key performance indicator, from having only 30 miles, how that will affect on the mission if you don't make it by that time. Just translate your vehicle as an airplane or as like a fighter jet, right?
I see.
Or a squad where they run out of gas. What is that impact on the performance of that particular unit, not securing that area by that timeline. So it's a predictive to key performance.
Hmm. I see. Yeah, there are definitely dependencies around KRIs and the KPIs. And I'll be honest with you, as we were talking, I was also looking it up. There is no defined methodology in terms of what is clear from a KPI. It's not like there is a standardized approach, like most organizations define their own KPIs as well
That's
as,
true.
right?
And you
So,
were right, doctor, when you said about ISACA, because I see ISACA, they are completely different than ISC Secure, because the predictive thing, it was kind of like, it was like mentioned or explained into the
mhm.
ISC Secure approach.
Yep.
So
No,
they're both right, but it's matter of like who's the audience.
yeah, that's absolutely true. I always tell people this, don't get married to the naming conventions because it keeps changing even from organizations to organizations. I mean, come on, for some of us that are like, it's even worse when it comes to like the NIST RMF. You go to one place, they call an SSP and SCTM, some call this, whatever. But then once someone understands the concepts and understand what is being asked, then it starts making sense. So the hardest part becomes if someone says something for you, you are now telling them to kind of explain what that means, and you might go like similar to how Cleandra said, "Oh no," you might go like,
Right.
"Oh wow, you mean this?" And we say it like ISACA calls poems risk register. So
Very interesting.
I am telling you, it's even worse, I would say, within the government side, because it's not agency specific, but it's sector specific. Like the Intel sector, they have completely different naming convention than NIST or
Hey,
DoD.
don't forget the overlays that we have in the Intel
Yes.
sector.
Yep.
The
Yep.
headache.
Like it's just a lot. But on the bright side, we will touch upon the basics of the basics NIST approach. Everybody should start getting ready to do, not just tell others to do. And yeah, seriously, no jokes. I always, so I'm more sympathetic to the beginning of the class most times because I feel like it's the part where people that are more junior staff, they are like, it's really hard for them. But this, the ATO, this is where I usually get those executives. I'm like, yeah, nice comeback. So,
And this is the part that I actually really need to hone in on because that's actually what I'm currently doing.
oh,
Is
really?
developing.
Nice.
Yes, and
Are
it's
you creating the deliverables yourself or are you telling others to do it?
well as of today, I've been tasked to do so for 2 of our systems, and I'm literally starting from the beginning and working it all the way to the end that I've been designated.
Well,
So yeah, so I hit a brick wall this morning.
no, this is great. Honestly, not selling this class or anything, but I remember when I was assigned to really teach this class. They were using the FAIR methodology, the FAIR kind of management framework and whatsoever. I look at it, I'm like, listen, I'm
Yeah.
putting this entire framework in the trash because these days nobody freaking uses the FAIR approach. People are on the industry side, commercial side. I think ISACA are really investing a lot. ISC Square do not have a framework, but ISACA are investing a lot into that commercial side and on the government and maybe statewide, including again the commercial side, not necessarily the NIST RMF, but the NIST controls are becoming, honestly, slowly becoming global standard. They are now,
Exactly. Yeah, but one thing that happened last week for my agency is they're even though Rev 5 just came out, they're trying to
mhm.
go full speed with it.
Yeah. Like I've
So
already
I
come
was
across
like,
two people that were telling me that they have implemented Rev 5. I'm like, oh wow.
yeah, exactly. So my brain's been fried all day. So like, wait, like what we're doing? What? It's like, yeah, make sure the overlays, make sure this, da 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 da. And yeah, we're going full speed with Rev 5.
Yeah,
Great,
I'm
thank you.
actually yet to take a look at the delta between Rev 4 and Rev 5. I think I should do that, but yeah, I also need to do it. That's good. Oh wow, look at it. We are almost All right, back to class. I'm going to quickly share my screen again. Let me know if you can see my screen, everybody.
I can see it.
Yes, I can see it.
Perfect. Sure. High level, everyone. We have just concluded the ISACA part. Consider the ISACA part just introducing you to risk management, right? Not necessarily exposing you to the implementation of how to do it, right? Because right now, we touch on IT risk identification, assessment, whatsoever. Yeah, we had these nice stories of gas tank and whatsoever, but it doesn't really get your hands dirty on like how do you do it. And basically, I guess that is entire school, right? That's why this is school is camp, because it doesn't teach you implementation. It only exposes you to the theoretical part. So on this part, we are going to actually do it, right? Starting from that identification and whatsoever, and we are going to take the approach of how the US government does it, mostly on the civilian side, and a little bit of Fedramp, right? Don't worry if these words are throwing you off. We are going to now touch high level on just introducing the US government cybersecurity frameworks. There are quite a lot, but I kind of just touch upon them high level, right? Okay, so let's get into it. So the landscape. You will, what kind of slide did I put together? I didn't know it's coming up like this. Okay, give me a second. Great, I think I got everything. So starting with this, as we mentioned beginning of the class, day one or day two or whatever it is, we kind of introduced this where there was a hierarchy of either policy, regulations, baselines, whatsoever. So NIST, and actually, you know what, let me cover the next slide. It might provide clarity, then we go back. Okay, great. So there was a law that was passed called the Fisma Law, right? All the way back in 2002, and then it got modernized in 2014, and now there is another one that might be coming up. It was a law, right, that was passed, an act that was passed. Initially it was called the Federal Information System Management Act, and then it became Modernization Act. Part of that modernization that happened when Obama signed it in 2014 was to also require modernization of all federal systems. Okay, now federal systems, but that's why lately you keep hearing the word modernization, modernization. One of the modernization requirements is to move to cloud, right? This applies to civilian. So you hear the health sector, IRS, all of these civilian side, right? The non-sensitive sides of the government. But then NIST, which is an organization. NIST is not a control. NIST is an organization, National Institute of Standard and what? Technology? No, I can't remember. Okay, and technology. They
Yes.
they were tasked to identify and work on how to implement FISMA, right? They should guide institutions, they should guide agencies on how to implement FISMA. So then they laid out this first document. This is document 0. If you are trying to look into NIST RMF, look into NIST 800-37. Rev 1 laid out steps in 6 steps, but then the revision version 2 came out, I believe, December last year, and it laid it out still 6 steps, but it added another step called step 0, which we are going to touch upon. Okay, I will go back a little bit. As I mentioned earlier, on that NIST framework and whatsoever, and now everybody understands this, right? NIST came out with these controls, which you will keep hearing everybody say NIST 800-53 controls. We just touched upon this, like we have Rev 4 and Rev 5 just came out. I saw Ron Ross literally posted it made a post on LinkedIn. I think, was it last week or so? It came out, or 2 weeks ago?
Right.
So this class, we're still focused on Rev 4. As I was mentioning earlier, we were just during the break. I'm even yet to actually look at the gap between this and this. So this is it, right? Initially, it is completely focused on agencies, federal agencies, right? To implement. But then you keep hearing of these different things like Fedramp, whatsoever, and you're like, what the heck is this? Sorry, everybody, it seems like my computer is choosing to misbehave over here, trying to move some few things, but it's, all right. So everybody is saying Fedramp, 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 and people are asking, what the heck is Fedramp, right? Then you start hearing the DoD, SRG, and whatsoever. So going all the way back to the top, just like we have this NIST, there are other regulations. This is not the only one applicable, but some of them, this is the one that applies to all federal agencies when it comes to information systems. But we have one like FAR that focus entirely on federal acquisitions, right? So anything the government is trying to get from either contractors, supply chain, whatsoever, all contractors that are providing acquisition services, I guess, purchase and whatsoever, there are 15 controls that were identified as part of the FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulation, that the contractors must comply with. There are 15 controls, you can look them up, but I think, not even I think, some of them are focused on authorized users, information types, verifying external information systems, and all of those things, right? Then we have like other ones, like say within FBI, limited to only FBI, there is the CGIS, which is the Criminal Justice Information Service. There are also 130 controls that are focused on, first and first, FBI is within the Justice Department. So that gives the law enforcement organizations, as well as kind of criminal justice agencies, access to criminal justice information. If you want to look into this history, go back all the way to post September 11, when the Patriot Act and things like that were passed for information sharing or whatsoever, all tied to that. And then we have DFARS. I think DFARS is what is being replaced now with CMMC or something like that, but it's more focused on protecting control unclassified information as well. DoD has adopted that as well, DFARS, around all contractors are required as well, but it's going to, I'm not sure if DFARS is meant to, if CMMC is meant to substitute DFARS or not, but it's just focused as well on the DoD side of things. It is focused on those DoD contractors, and it requires all DoD suppliers, including the ones that supply commercial items, to really be in compliance. It has also 140 controls. So we now also touch upon the NIST. Then you will keep hearing Fedramp. So Fedramp is another dedicated agency that is within GSA, and they have controls as well. The controls are coming entirely from the NIST controls, then they added additional controls, but they are entirely cloud service provider focused. This is a little nuance that people are, oh, thanks, Jonathan. So DFARS are, so Department of State owns DFARS, or Department of State enforces DFARS? Jonathan, please add to that.
They go hand in hand with the DoD, but it's what actually tracks the international.
Oh, so
items. Yeah.
The department tracks the international side, like around items? Okay.
Correct.
Great. So back to, by the way, thank you for that. So for the Fedramp side, the CSP focused only cloud service providers. So let's take Azure, GCP, let's take AWS, but they are not only cloud service providers. Like even a government agency can be a cloud service provider, like login.gov. It's basically the IAM solution for the .gov side. It's a service, a SaaS service, any SaaS product. Dropbox, Box, Zoom is also a SaaS product. All of these that are serving the government, they are considered cloud service providers. Fedramp regulates them, not necessarily directly within NIST, because NIST does not enforce or even oversee it. It passes the implementation and oversight to the specific agencies. But because cloud service providers are not government institutions, Fedramp oversees them. all cloud service providers that are serving the government side, civilian side, must be in compliance with Fedramp requirements. Now, a small misconception that happens lately a lot is federal agencies, most of them, you go in there, but because they are now modernizing, they keep assuming that they have to satisfy Fedramp. No, they still have to satisfy Fisma, not Fedramp compliance. Fedramp is focused on the providers, not the federal agencies themselves. They are consumers. Consumers do not need to comply with Fedramp controls. But you go into these agencies, you see them using Fedramp templates. You see them whatsoever. And guess what? The templates are actually tailored for cloud service providers, so it provides some confusions sometimes, especially around inheritance and whatsoever. Now, Fedramp entirely is focused on the civilian side, but for the DoD, there is also the cloud computing SRG, right? Which DISA within DoD oversees that. These are not the DoD specific controls, they are for cloud service providers. Similar to how Fedramp is for civilians, this DoD SRG is completely CSP focused. And it is overseen by DISA, meaning be it, you keep hearing of AWS GovCloud, you will hear of Microsoft Azure Gov, all of these that are serving the government side, they need to be in compliance with this. One of those requirements from either both Fedramp and DoD SRGs is actually to have a dedicated data center for government data, right? Meaning,
Hello.
I think we lost you.
I think we lost him.
Yeah, I think we lost.
so yeah, what I was saying is, did you hear when I was talking about the physical separation?
No.
No.
So where did we stop? Fisma? Addition or- Can everybody please go on? Just one person let me know where did we stop? Did everybody hear when I was talking? Can everybody please go on mute? Thank you. Just let me know over chat if you heard when I was talking about Fedramp only serving the civilian side. Okay, I will take it.
Yeah, we heard the civilian side stuff about Fedramp.
All right, thank you very much. So yeah, based on that, Fedramp is only meant to serve cloud service provider, but only from civilian consumers. DISA within DoD have the cloud computing SRG that is serving the DoD community, right? So Fedramp do not oversee these controls, even though DISA and Fedramp, honestly, they work hand in hand very closely, but DISA is responsible for that oversight. And beyond that, unlike how, so I was talking about earlier how a lot of federal agencies keep implementing Fedramp controls using Fedramp templates whatsoever, even though they are the consumers, and Fedramp is only tailored for providers, right? Not necessarily the consumers. As such, still Fedramp agencies should be complying with Fisma around these controls, but some of them keep looking into Fedramp templates using Fedramp resources. And that is sometimes where the little confusion comes into the picture, because these templates are tailored for cloud service providers, not the federal agencies. So you look at like the inheritance or whatsoever, they are completely different. So
it's the service providers who are getting Fedramp certified, not the agencies, right?
Yes, but an agency also, if it took the position of becoming a provider,
right,
have to get Fedramp. An example is login.gov. Like, I can't remember who owns, I think GSA, yeah. GSA owns login.gov, and they had to get it Fedramp because it's a provider and it's a SaaS product. Being a cloud service provider, Zoom is a cloud service provider. Dropbox is a cloud service provider. Box is a cloud service provider. Google Drive, Microsoft Office. It's beyond just the Azure environment as well as the AWS.
Office 365.
Right? But little details. Login.gov, they are allowing other agencies authenticate using their service. So in that capacity, they are a service. But can everybody please go on mute? But when an agency is only serving as a consumer, they don't need to look into Fedramp templates or Fedramp controls. They still need to be in compliance with Fisma. However, most of these agencies, even though it's their internal services, they keep looking at Fedramp documentation. But Fedramp documentations are completely tailored for CSPs. Similar to how that is, Fedramp is entirely civilian. For the defense side, we have DISA looking at the cloud SRG, right? They have the cloud SRG. Now, it's very similar to DISA and Fedramp. They collaborate a lot, but still, DISA oversees that. Now, any service provider must be in compliance with Fedramp, and actually Fedramp will oversee things. They have to meet Fedramp requirements. That is one little difference. NIST is not tasked to provide oversight. As such, NIST passed that responsibility to the agencies themselves. So you find the agencies are responsible for ensuring the compliance. NIST doesn't come in to check. NIST doesn't work with 3 PAOs. NIST just write the documentations and provide the guidelines, and according to the OMB documentations as well as Fisma, agencies are responsible for that, right? So, however, GAO, the audit arm of the government, have included ensuring Fisma compliance into their scope. As such, when they come to look at your budgeting and everything beyond just this compliance, they also look at Fisma compliance. All right, now, Fedramp is focused on that. We touch upon this, but then also I was saying, like, part of the requirement for these is, like, for the cloud service provider is actually to have a completely separate, isolated data center. Where I was cracking a joke, I think I lost everybody at the time, but like Fortis Cupcake is commercial, so it cannot be in the same data center as the government, right? But even beyond that, there are levels to it. Like you will have, say, let's use this, the DoD SRG, you have like level IL2, you have IL4, you have like IL5, or within Fedramp, you have the low, moderate, and high. Either way, from Fedramp requirement, all of these can be in the same data center, right? But when you look at it from the DoD SRG requirement, IL2, 4, and 5, they are all considered unclassified, so they can be in the same data center. But anything that gets into that IL6, or maybe I will say IL5 plus overlays, start getting into that sensitive part, because IL6 can take up to a secret data. It requires its own dedicated data center. One of the requirements is to actually make sure the identity of the data center is completely isolated. So yeah, we do know, like, there is AWS GovCloud, we know about Azure Gov, we might know they are in Manassas, Ashburn, you can even point it out, but you are not knowing where the IL6 data centers or the IL5 plus data centers are. One of the requirements, right? Because they carry heavy sensitive information. Now,
Professor, I have a question on how and I put it in the chat, how the DISA STIGs fit into this hierarchy of if you will, reference standards and compliances.
Very good question. DISA STIGs are technology specific, right? Where it's just a checklist of initially around VMs, operating system whatsoever, but it has expanded, but they are completely technical controls that a system must have. An example is DoD does not use commercial TLS certificates. DoD have their own dedicated public key PKIs, right? If you have any Kpis or whatsoever, you can go and download the public keys, and the private keys are on the other side, right? So part of STIG requirements is for DoD to, like, DoD requires every single machine to use their own DoD certificate. Now, it's just part of what we call hardening, but they are completely technology focused, whereas NIST controls go beyond the technology. It includes operational controls, it includes physical controls. Same thing with the Fedramp controls, including the SRG controls. It includes those physical controls where it will say that even there is a need for good lightning. 95% of the time, the reason why we are not focused on those PS controls these days, including like the contingency planning controls, CP controls as much, is because we are modernizing. It falls under the cloud provider's responsibility within the data center to provide personal security, right? The PS controls. But the coverage for these, it's more organizational focus, the entire organization, right? That's why you have what we call the common controls that applies to the entire organization. An example of it is have a policy for, like, let's say AC1, that is more focused on that account management, and having a policy in place that says these, like just a policy that sets maybe account and password parameters and whatsoever. That should apply to the entire organization. The reason why we don't constantly do them is because when you come to like, you are constantly focusing on your own little project within the organization, and it's already been in place and identified for the organization, so you're inheriting them. We will touch a little bit on inheritance when we get to implementation, but that is the difference between statistics and this. Keep in mind, statistics are government focused, so even federal agencies that are implementing statistics, they cannot use the DoD certificate. So as such, all the statistics reports comes out as a finding because they don't use DoD certificates. Federal agencies are not mandated to use DoD certificates, but DoD must use DoD certificate. The second thing is for the commercial world, because these stakes, we have a saying like, if you ever achieve 100% stake compliance, then your machine is not usable. Another stakes that, well, not necessarily stakes, but hardening guidelines that are in place is provided by CIS, the Center for Internet Security. They are more commercial focused, so consider them similar to ISACA. All right.
But Professor, real quick, but the statistics are based, as you said, in technology to the NIST controls, right? It's just the standard technical implementation guidance on the NIST framework. Is that correct?
Nope. Within NIST controls, we have one control actually around SI, system integrity, that requires you to implement stakes. What we just did is, can everybody please go on mute? It's just that stakes in themselves, and please everybody go on mute. So within these statistics themselves have, when you implement these statistics, they also achieve certain control requirements here. Let me give you a quick example. Within this statistic, there is a password reuse instruction where it will say your password must not be more than 3 days old. Within NIST controls or Fedramp or cloud whatsoever, there's also like IA5 control, where you are defining your password parameters, where you will say the password length is 15 characters and the password reuse is only 3. It has no relationship with this because this is NIST framework driven. This is compliance, this is stick compliance driven. But since this implementation also achieved this, we might as well have an existing mapping for that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I copy what you're telling me. It doesn't relate back to NIST, but more to the CNS instruction landscape.
No, not really. Why don't we, in the interest of time, let's touch upon this after. I think I will provide more clarity if I pull a whiteboard here. But
all right,
the mapping for this stick and that. Okay, CNSSI, similar to how we have NIST here, focus entirely on this consumer side. Actually, CNSSI, that's the Committee on National Security Systems Instruction whatsoever, 1253, provide a guideline on how to decide the categorization and sensitivity of all national security systems, right? So once we start getting into this in depth, you'll see there's something like the step 1, step 2 around categorization and selecting controls. For the civilian side, the step 1 and 2, and even the step 3, selecting controls, is a bit different with the non-civilian side or the national security systems, which is this. And it has 862 controls only because it tends to focus so much more on what we call CCIs. You can find like one single NIST control, like let's say AC2 is equivalent to like maybe 8 CCIs, because CCIs focus on action items and this focus on just the high level controls. So let's say for you to implement AC2, you have to do 15 actions because there's AC21, AC22, AC2A, whatsoever. Whereas CCIs, DoD, based on the culture, based on how meticulous it is and precise and whatsoever, every single control is detailed out as a single action item. Implement this, that's one CCI. Do this, that's another CCI. So a bundle of many CCI can result into this, okay? NISPOM, let's keep that, but it's just the classified controls, right? Guidance on that and whatsoever. If you have access to the RMF Knowledge Center, the KS, go over there and generate the overlays. You will see them. If you don't know what that is, then you don't need to know what NISPOM classified overlays are. If this is entirely chaotic to you, let me even make it more chaotic. Don't worry about that, because guess what? We are only looking at this and getting our hands dirty at this, okay? All right, moving on. Any question on that? Great. So we touch on this. Now, NIST provides us with the standards, the guidelines, ignore the baselines, procedures whatsoever, but we have the series of all of these documentation from NIST is what we call the NIST 800 series publications. But we also have additional documentations from NIST that are called the FIPS. What is the difference? The 800-37 disc set the entire tone. The 800 series documentation do this, that is, they present the criteria, right? How criteria for system deployment, architecture, security, and whatsoever. The FIPS provide the standards. Let me give you an example. Example of that. What is an example of a very dumbed down example? Will be this will say use an iPhone. That's it. And this will say only iPhone 11 or above is supported. That is, if you ever feel like this is so chaotic for you, focus on the NIST special publications, provide the criteria, use the iPhone. The FIPS publications look into the description and the standards from where it's put in, like it has to be TLS 1.2 or 1.3. This is the type of encryption algorithm we are going to use. All of those things, the granular criteria, right? Okay, now, just a second. We already touched upon what Fedramp is, right? That is the organization that standardize what? Cloud service providers. This, okay? What are
This is the reason why AWS is ahead of the other competitors, because they are more mature in the Fedramp. It doesn't necessarily mean they are better than the others, but just because of they are more on the DoD side and it started earlier.
You do know I work for Microsoft. How can you tell me AWS is ahead of everybody? No, Azure is ahead of everybody. All right, jokes aside.
No, I said it's not one better than the other, but because of, the Gartner report that we talked about earlier puts AWS a little ahead of the others, not necessarily because it's better than the others, because of the maturity model when going through the Fedramp. I'm just trying to validate this.
You're absolutely right. They are, I'll be honest with you, Amazon are the first at everything. They are the first major cloud provider to get Fedramp authorized. They are the first cloud provider to get GISA authorized, IL2, IL4, IL5, IL6. Like right now, Azure has achieved those things, but they are the only two dominant players. And when you look at it, in all honesty, when it comes to compliance spaces, Well, we have already closed all the compliance because both of them have been authorized now at Fedramp High, as well as DISA, or rather DoD impact level 5+, right? Because there's really nothing like IL6 environment, there's only 5+. When you start putting the overlays and it gets to a point where it's now considered a secret system, then you are getting into the 6. So yeah, AWS was the first to achieve all of these. And that's the absolute truth on why they have so much dominance. And even because they are the first to have the Fedramp authorizations, a lot of federal agencies began using them, and they really have a wide scope in the market, including things like having the first HIPAA compliance. But when you look at it on a global scale, like who has the ISO standard? Who has the PCI DSS standards in place? Who has like the Australian signals in place and whatsoever? Azure is leading, because I'm not gonna say AWS is leading and you don't expect me to sell. I used to be a consultant too. You're not gonna box me. No worries. All right, going back to Fedramp, right?
Get a bonus for that.
Going back to Fedramp, just high level, look at it like this, right? We all know cloud computing. If you don't, go look it up. This class is not about cloud computing, but we have the cloud models from infrastructure, platform, service, right? And then we have the deployment model where you have either a private cloud, public cloud, community cloud, hybrid cloud. A government cloud is more on that community cloud, right? Because it's only for government communities, right? That is where Fedramp plays. Fedramp is responsible for authorizing all cloud providers that are going to be used by the government. DISA is responsible for authorizing all cloud service providers that are going to be used by the government. But around the DoD space, well, the Intel community do not, like, they are still agents. Let's keep the Intel community, because they, unlike the DoD where there's a single umbrella, they are just something else. All right. They do, anybody from the IC community knows, like, there's so much individualistic approach to their own processes. So some are looking at DISA, some are looking at their own internal ways. Okay. So again, keep in mind, we're only taking the NIST approach. Earlier, I was talking about NIST 800-37. The Rev 1 did not have the implement phase. The Rev 2, I believe, came out December 2019 when it went live. And that is the one that includes the prepare stage. And you will see the reason why we need this important phase. One of my most favorite phases, because when I was a consultant doing all of this work with different agencies, lack of planning is what makes this entire step a nightmare. You begin realizing, like, oh, we went to the assessment phase. We haven't even identified who our 3PAO is going to be. That is why it's good to have the planning phase. From day one, you know who your 3PAO, your auditor, your assessor is going to be. You have identified the authorizing official, all of this. If I'm speaking gibberish, don't worry, I promise you, by the end of this phase, when you get your hands dirty, either you like it or not, you will kind of understand what an AO means. All right. I feel more for Dave though. Say like he took the class and now he's here again, feeling it all over again. Thank you, Dave. All right. Any question on this page before I move to the next? Awesome. So, tools that are being used. Templates, obviously, because there are so many documentations from the SSP whatsoever. Most civilian agencies, they have their own customized templates, but that's what I was saying earlier, that you see a lot of them using Fedramp templates, which they really shouldn't be using. But at least also on the DoD side, I wouldn't say there is a standardized template, but there are standardized terminologies around, like, it has to be CCI, like you can go to RMFKS to download all of those applicable controls and whatsoever. Don't worry, we'll get to it. What are the formats that we are processing things? We have like Word documents, the ARF, that's the asset reporting format. I think we are getting rid of it now. The Open Vulnerability Assessment Language. OSCAR is a new initiative. I really love OSCAR. I'm working closely as well, actually part of job with Fedramp and GSA, but the goal is to standardize the entire way we are delivering this. Unfortunately, it's still heavily focused on Fedramp and DISA not necessarily on the consumers from like government agencies, but I believe we'll cross there. Dashboard, how do we approach things and whatsoever? These are just some random tools that are there. There are a lot of them out there. Tableau is a tool, and ServiceNow, they are used for dashboarding and ticketing, especially ServiceNow ticketing. You come to the technical implementation. So you have your operating system. How do you implement the controls? Manually, using as a security engineer. I did that, was a pain. And then I started writing my own PowerShell scripts to kind of automate Windows at the time. And then like with at least Linux, it's kind of easier because whatsoever. But then especially with like the PowerShell scripts, you are just one Microsoft. Yeah, I know I'm with Microsoft, but I'm gonna say it's bad. You automate your thing with just like your little PowerShell script so that it deploys across, and then Windows will just send out their update, and it just messes up everything, right? So another thing to pay attention to.
I'm confused by your comment, Professor. Are you saying that the use of PowerShell scripts is counterproductive or productive?
I'm not saying it's counterproductive, but I'm saying it's not a long-term thing. Let me give you an example. When I was on using a lot of RHEL and CentOS, I can have my scripts just like written in Python or whatsoever. Within Windows system, you are trying to configure, say, password parameters on a global scale within Windows. So you are not going to do it directly on the user configuration, but you will go into what we call the policy, right? GPO, the group policy whatsoever. If you go in there, you may be already written a PowerShell script on how to automate just that deployment. So you have maybe new person coming on board and a laptop needs to be issued to them. Instead of just me going constantly in there, I have my little script that I will just have it run and that it implements those password parameters, right? What I'm saying is Windows, maybe this is a Windows 10 machine, Microsoft will just release an update overnight and this will not run. Trust me, it's just sometimes a syntax. Oh, look at it, I'm even talking about it. Jonathan is saying also every time Windows updates run, there could be updates to syntax for PowerShell. That's absolutely true. By the way, we have like 4 versions of PowerShell. So
Understood. Yeah.
but like at least within Azure right now, there is this thing called Azure Blueprints. AWS do not have scripts because AWS is kind of a collection of different things. They don't have their own technology per se, especially around virtual machines or whatsoever. Like they don't have operating system. It's either Windows services or Linux, right? A lot of things are not like necessarily AWS specific, right? Well, there are Terraform and Ansible, but Ansible is not necessarily, it's not even, Ansible is not an Amazon product, right? Jenkins is also not an Amazon product. These are all,
I'd like to talk to you offline about this because it does concern me what you're saying about PowerShell.
I mean, no problem. We can definitely take it offline. But these are all technical implementation things from the blueprints. Listen, Jonathan, Azure is still ahead because like Jenkins, Terraform, Ansible, none of them are Amazon products. Yeah, I know it's a class, but listen, I'm selling. You can see CloudWatch, that is an Amazon product. AWS Inspector, that's an Amazon product. But anyway, so yeah, like the custom scripts that I was talking about. SIEM tools, we touch upon SIEM. I'm not gonna go over it. If you don't know what a SIEM is, go back to the previous note. But again, those monitoring capabilities. Splunk is a major one in the market. Within Azure, there's the log analytics. AWS have their CloudWatch, and I believe the other one is it Cloud Logs or whatsoever. I can't remember, but there are other ones. GRC tools.
HP ArcSight. Well, it's no longer HP, but it was a product called ArcSight.
I see. Oh, Jonathan is a Splunk architect. Nice. Everybody, go to Jonathan if you want to know more about SIEM. I'm actually not a monitoring person. In my viewpoint, monitoring is the most annoying thing to do within the RMF because it is the one thing that requires you, especially as a consultant, be constantly connected. If you are a risk professional as a consultant, you walk in, do it, you get out, get on the next project. If you get yourself into O&M, we call it operations and monitoring, good luck to you. Same thing every day. Anyway, moving on, GRC tools. If you don't understand GRC, it's fine, we'll touch upon it. But commercial side RSA Archer is gaining so much traction, especially even within the gov. Sentinel, Jeremy, I really am not that, I don't know so much about Sentinel in terms of usability, but I'll still tell you it's good. But no, seriously, I do not know how the capabilities Sentinel, Microsoft Sentinel provides. Happy to help you look into it though. But yeah, RSA Archer heavily used on the commercial sector as well as the civilian side. But I can tell you, DoD, they swear by EMAS. Booz Allen built it. Great tool, so many improvement points. The intelligence community, they use so much of Exacta. A company called Taylor's built it. And we are not going to use any of this in the class. Just putting it out there. Assessment tools around those auditing. I love this. I don't know, it's no longer in use, but during my days of implementation and doing stakes, I just love the DisasCap tool. It's simple, it's easy to use, but for some reason they haven't been kind of really investing in it. There are a lot of tools right now that do a lot of the jobs, like Nessus. Nessus does a lot. Other
Tenable.
yeah, Tenable Nessus, yeah. There's also the threat guard,
And
a lot of stick scanning and whatsoever. But also Nessus does a good job of vulnerability scanning as well as stick scan. I think that's why, because they're able to really, and honestly, they're gaining traction, right? When you look at the web application side of things, there are tools like Bubsuit. There are other ones, but I'm more conversant within Bubsuit. I don't know ATP. Is ATP a web application tool or infrastructure and network, Jeremy?
It's like Microsoft Windows Defender ATP.
Oh,
That's the
our own product.
it's
Right.
fancy.
Right.
I know there are so many we are just putting out there, and I can't remember all of them. No, but honestly, this
It's
I'm
good.
only- for the past decade, I have been a heavy Linux person and AWS centric, and then I joined Microsoft in March, and I started drinking the Kool-Aid. I haven't finished drinking it yet, but trust me, when I'm done, like, I'm going to be all.
Yeah, no. The Microsoft environment is pretty robust because it can tell you the patching status across the environment.
I don't know. I will be honest. Windows 10 is proven to be okay. The Agile environment is really, really coming up ever since we started focusing on customer-centric rather than being developer-centric, because that is one part that I felt like AWS is really beating Agile around that customer focus. But then when you think of it, like Amazon swears on their customers, right? So that customer service, because you go into the AWS portal, is not as confusing as the Azure. That's absolutely true. AWS has a lot of documentation, and even beyond the documentation, they make it such that it's consumable for the consumer, right? Like you can pick the AWS documentation and basically understand it without having so much technical expertise. The Azure one, it's now that we are investing into that. I can tell you one thing though, we have way more services than they do. We have over 300 plus services. All right, I'm done selling. Monitoring tools. Well, SIM can also classify as a monitoring tool, but like within Azure, we have Azure monitors. Can you see like how every place I'm putting the Azure tools first? That's because I took the Azure fundamentals. Like, all right, we have a lot of GRC tools. We have the custom tools. Okay. Don't worry. Can everybody please go on mute unless you're specifically talking to me? That's it for at least two. This is nowhere an exhaustive list. There are so many tools. The market is now booming. When I say booming, like it's just growing and growing and growing. And there are so many tools. People are specializing. Like Jonathan just mentioned, he's a Splunk architect. I absolutely love Splunk. It's an amazing tool. Like it's really an amazing tool. The only thing I didn't like it is when I was looking into it, it's very agent focused, not necessarily integration specifically. The integration is dependent upon agents. So unless you're, oh, nice. 50% architects, 50% ISSM. That's good, Jonathan. Really cool. Yeah. So Jonathan will be on that technical side and whatsoever as well of Splunk. I'm not conversant, but if you want like Splunk, lately there is a high demand, by the way, a very, very high demand market for Splunk experts, just like there is high for like AWS, Azure certifications or whatsoever. Splunk is basically dominating the government entirely, including the DoD. They are just swallowing everything around SIEM. But the absolute truth is good. It is good. Their dashboarding could be better, but it's been a while since I used it. So I know Tableau for dashboarding is really good, so you can connect the two. One thing I like about all of these tools, in all honesty, is they are not following around the early technology methodology of like how Cisco used to be a pain. For you to use a Cisco device, you need a Cisco switch, you need to use this specific port that is a proprietary port for Cisco. No, almost all of the tools here, they really connect with each other very well. Like the connection between Tableau and ServiceNow and Splunk and whatsoever, it's really amazing. So I like the fact that the entire industry is focusing more on providing added value to the consumer, not necessarily locking you into their own tool. I can say that that's a really great thing. All right, so what does the
I want to confirm what you said about the Splunk and Archer and all that stuff. If you go back kindly to the previous slide, so all agencies with the .gov, you know, with the except to DoD, they are supervised by the DHS and they use the RSA Archer for the executive dashboard. So basically they have like 3 different layers, the layer A, B, C, and D. So layer A and B, they use Splunk for integration for all those agencies tools. And when it comes to the agency executive dashboards for the senior officials of each agency, they go with the RSA Archer and Tableau. So Splunk pull the data from the layer A and push it to layer C and D through RSA Archer and Tableau, so they can see those. And on layer A, they use the Nessus, the
Yep.
center.
Yep, absolutely agree. Like sometimes, like especially like the log, Splunk will take it, or maybe it will go to a data storage, and then GRC tool like RC Archer will take it from here. FYI, I 100% agree with you, by the way. Even the DoD sector, but one point of correction, you made a statement that I disagree with, where you said all of them are being overseen by DHS. No.
I'm sorry, I meant with the CDM, the continuous diagnostic
Okay,
mitigation.
that I agree. That I 100% agree, because 90% of the role that DHS is now playing within the RMF is around TIC, the requirements for trusted internet connections, or maybe trusted internet connection, right? Where you have every agency must have a dedicated fiber or maybe their own VPN from the cloud service provider to them without transversing the public internet. That is one thing. And I think even DHS, they are passing that responsibility to CISA. Well, CISA is under DHS, but I agree with you. FYI, I used to work with Deloitte, and Deloitte is a managed service provider. So basically putting different types of these tools into one thing and selling it as a single solution, right? So I absolutely have done a little bit of that architecture. But yeah, they're really like being conversant in some of these tools has so much value. I'll be honest with you right now, I don't want to do any of this, but I agree with you.
I'm curious what you do, Dr. Ibrahim. So we probably later. I'm just curious, like, what is your role at Microsoft? Or is it from compliance side, consultant, or technical?
No, I am a senior manager, so I do a lot of deciding what tools are we going to build. So if you ask me, I'm trying to.
Are you marketing for one of these on the slide?
Let's take it offline. I can tell you that my work revolves around these 2 sectors, the DoD and the Intel. That's what I do, but we can take it offline.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I would vote for PowerShell for Linux.
Non-recorded, please. I'm sorry?
I said I would vote for PowerShell for Linux.
PowerShell for Linux. Well, here's the thing. We have already embraced having Ubuntu within Windows systems. That's a good one. I actually don't know if PowerShell is supported within, I think you can call Ubuntu, sorry, not Ubuntu, I think you can call Linux, Unix systems within PowerShell. But I'll be honest with you, I will never use PowerShell for Linux. I will just go to maybe the main powerhouse. I rather just use my Python.
Right.
Use with Python because Python is super powerful. It's applicable everywhere. But then
Very true.
PowerShell is just it's just like the Windows updates really messes up with PowerShell scripts, and it makes sense because they are not for they don't like stakes. This entire .gov market, it's literally like, well, I wouldn't to throw numbers. I would say it's less than 3% of Microsoft Windows global market. Like I think the most remote place, if you go and you see a device, if you had to look at what the OS is, I guess you will see Windows. It might be an outdated one, but you will see a Windows machine. So the market is beyond that, and not everybody is writing those scripts, right? So, but I agree with you. Maybe when we take it offline, I can talk to you about what I do in that sector. All right.
Okay.
So going back, these are like the tools. When I keep saying getting your hands dirty, what does that mean? We are going to do this journey, right? You are going to do the planning phase where you identify these. How do you categorize? Identify the inheritable controls, identify all of these nice things, do your own boundary. And the bright side of it, please, Dave and I will do a very good job of making sure the videos are available. But if you don't know this, please do not spend time trying to capture the notes as I am going through it in class. Rather, just focus on understanding what we are doing and then go back to the videos to kind of do it yourself. I don't plan on having you do full as if it's a dedicated agency. Like when you look at all the artifacts here, the only thing we will just look for are like SSP, I believe, no, a little bit of BIA, not even the ITCP. Like I have bundled the ITCP and IRP to just that information technology continuous monitor. No, ISCM, that's what we will have. I believe we will have a FIPS 199, and that's it. There are other ones that if you are doing it day to day, you already know them. If you don't know them, you will learn them when you get the job related to that, right? But we're not going to touch upon that. We are also going to skip the IVMV, internal validation, because it's kind of the same thing, only that this is from an external entity and this is more from internal, like more due diligence before the assessment. But we will do an assessment and you will do that. So you will do the assessment as well. We will definitely build a SAR and a poem because they are very important. They are kind of the guiding decision of whether an environment should be authorized or whatsoever. We are not necessarily going to remediate, but we are going to talk about what remediation is, but we will identify it in the poem. And I am the AO. This is my best part of the class. You submit a one-page authorization document to me, and I will go in and sign it if I agree with your system. Or I will say, yep, you are authorized, bye-bye, or nope, this system is not authorized. But don't worry, low-hanging fruits, nothing major. If it's your new thing, if you're new to it, like the implementation part, I'm only going to ask you to take only one control. You can take a simple control as having a screensaver in place or having a banner or having a password parameter, just simple implementation. My goal is not to have you spend so much cycle in the unnecessary part, but rather just to take it from beginning to the end and wear many hats. You are going to be like the ISSO at this level where you're doing the planning. You're also going to be the person who suffers the most, start building all of these documentation. That's the risk professional. 95% we call consultants to do that. You are going to build an ATO package, and you're also going to wear, again, the hat of an ISSO to see if the ATO package is good to go. But I want the technical implementation. Either use your laptop, either whatsoever, I don't care. Whatever you choose to pick, fine by me, just show it to me. You are going to become a system engineer. So if you are like, no, listen, I'm not gonna do this in this class because I don't know anything technical. I don't even know what you guys are talking about. It's a PowerShell. What I know how to do is to tell you the recipe for cupcakes. I'm sorry. Part of the requirement in the class, you are going to implement. But what you're going to implement, I'm absolutely willing to work with you. If you have never done this, I don't care. Use your iPhone, put a password lock for me. There is a control around AC and IA that requires you to have passwords in place or lock mechanisms in place. I will accept that. We will identify the least thing that you know how to do, and we will do it. But you must implement, meaning you're going to wear the hat of a system engineer or security engineer just for that time. Beyond that, you are also going to wear the hat of an assessor, where yes, it is your system. But before you even become the assessor, I still want you as a system engineer to do the most annoying thing ever, that is collect an evidence. So I need you either to record or send me screenshots or whatever it is that shows like your system has been implemented, like you have implemented your technical control. Then you are going to be an assessor. And I want you to tell me as an assessor, what is the failure with that implementation that you did? One thing, I'm not looking for you to go and brainstorm on what the problem is. No. We are just going to walk through it together, but the instructions are out there. As we go through it, you will understand. Once all of those are in place, you are going to have that security assessment report for me in place that informs the authorizing official. That's the only thing I'm not going to let you be. You're not going to be the boss in terms of being the CEO, the CISO, or whatsoever. No, I am. I am that in this class. I'm going to wear the hat, sit down on my chair. Actually, I think I'm going to have you submit your AO, and then I'm going to take a 1-month vacation as if it's like how it is done in the real life, and then it's going to sit there on the desk and collecting dust. No waivers, absolutely no waivers. No. This is the fun part. Just kidding, Cleandra. Let's talk and see what you mean by waiver. No, this is not at 5 p.m. on a Friday. No, this is all the activities from that we are going to have through the end of the semester. I'm absolutely not saying you are going to do all of this in one day. Absolutely no. It's what we are going to start. The first ask is just to do planning and categorization. Don't worry. For right now, I don't think there is an ask in the class to do any of this. Nope, we will get on this next week. And the key thing though, I will literally stress it. This is the part where apologize everybody, please, if you have to drop, feel free to drop, but I still need to cover these things. And if you have the time, please just afford me 4 minutes. Apologies for that. But I will be terrible. Some of you will hate me, and I'm just saying it ahead of the time. Ask Dave, he knows this. I'm going to be a real pain to you all. I didn't say I'm not going to be supportive. I'll be available. I'll be reachable. I will support you from end to end, but I'm going to be ridiculously crazy in my requirements and ask. If I
So you would be 100% authentic to an actual chief level executive.
Exactly. If I say that I want you to submit the SSP in a Word document and you submit an Excel, I promise you I'm going to fail you that 5 points of that activity. You might think I'm being ridiculous. No. Ask anybody who has gone through an ATO. There are so many different types of people. And if you come through a difficult assessor, a difficult CISO, a difficult whatsoever, those are the kind of things that will happen, and you will not be able to achieve an ATO, and you will not get your system to go live. It costs more money. It frustrates everybody. If that is your job and you are not the CISO, affects your bonus, affect whatsoever, if you're seeing it from how it impacts you, if you're seeing it from how it impacts the entire system, if it's meant to be a COVID detection system or maybe a COVID whatsoever, you not being careful to pay attention to it has resulted in the system not going live, has resulted into not having a tool that allows COVID trace whatsoever. I kid you not, I am being that pain not because I want to, but because that is how it is. I promise you, I have had an ATO memo that I drafted when my wife gave birth, before I took my, when we had our son, before I took my little break, I literally write the 1-page ATO memo that we are going to submit. Only God knows how I literally mistyped. I don't even know. And I got it tossed back. And because of that, it literally affected us. spelling, punctuation, to the point that I have seen, especially within DoD, good luck trying to not have maybe like, you know, that a place where it's meant to be in italics and you decide to have it normal, good luck, someone will toss it back. If it is meant to be, the text is meant to be literally in block size where it's perfectly aligned, and no, you don't want to because you feel like, yeah, sorry, I'm going to pick on people like me. I'm a millennial. I don't care. I'm going to do it my way. Take it or leave it. Blah, blah, blah. Well, good luck to you. It's coming back. If you decide to give it to them where it's not aligned, you have to follow the instructions. And I kid you not, I will do the same. So start hitting me right now. All right. I'm sorry. I know I'm being too serious, but that's how it is. Questions?